All right, everybody, welcome back into Cherry Picking. Today's video looking at the top 10 fantasy hockey defensemen for the second half of the season. So just did the forwards video. If you haven't checked that one out, be sure to check that out on the OwnersBox Fantasy YouTube channel. So today looking at 11 defensemen, I have a 10A and 10B because I just couldn't decide which one I wanted to leave out, and I wanted to include both of them. So 11 defensemen that will have the most points from now until the end of the regular season. Let's get into it. All right, so the first guy we have on the list is John Carlson on the Washington Capitals. He's my 10A pick. You want to say I have two guys at this spot, but I know people must think kind of insane for having him inside my top 10. But if you look at his underlying metrics, and it is John Carlson, we have seen him be a top 10 fantasy hockey defenseman in years past. I don't think it's all that crazy. He is one of the few players on Washington creating a lot of offense at a very efficient rate as well. This season, 6th in expected goals for amongst defensemen. Evan Bouchard, Erik Carlson, Quinn Hughes are all in the same realm when it comes to expected goals for created this season, and all those guys have way more points than him. You know, you have Quinn Hughes, who leads all defensemen in points, and Evan Bouchard's having a breakout season with 43 points this year. Erik Carlson, 35 points, and Carlson lacking behind there with just 29 points and just 3 goals. As I mentioned, we've seen John Carlson have the 65 to 70 point seasons where he is a top 10 fantasy hockey defenseman. So we have seen him do it before, and I don't think he's really lost a step. I know he's a little bit older. I think it's more his team that's lost a step. I think the Capitals are in total disarray, but I don't think that'll change too much of how he'll end up producing. His ranks amongst defensemen this season: 6th in expected goals for, 18th in shots on goal, 7th in scoring chances, and tied 8th in high danger scoring chances. So pretty much all of those in the top 10. The one thing that just lacks is his actual production at this point, but we've seen Carlson have the lowest shooting percentage of his career to this point of the season at 2.8% or below 3%. He's never had a shooting percentage lower than 5%, and his career average is right around 6%. And for the last 5 seasons, he has not had a shooting percentage lower than 7%, with his career high going up to 9%. So I think we'll see in the second half of the season a much more invigorated John Carlson, who'll be able to score a lot more goals and maybe dictate the pace of this offense on this Capitals team, because they certainly need it. All right, so the 10B on this list is Morgan Rielly on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Morgan Rielly on pace for his second 70-plus point season right now. I think he could definitely get there because of the start so far this year. 40-plus points through the first half of the season through 48 games played. Very solid. Amongst defensemen, his ranks 14th in expected goals for with 7 goals for this season. His shooting percentage a little bit higher than last year's, but back when he had his 70-point season, his shooting percentage was at 9%, but his career shooting is about 4%. So that's why it's always hard to believe that Morgan Rielly will get back to that 70-point season, because of how high his shooting percentage was that year. That's almost close to like a second, third line forward shooting percentage, not a defenseman we've seen. But his shot volume this year has certainly increased, which is good to see. His hits and shots blocked doesn't really jump off the page either, but he plays on the Leafs, who score a ton of goals, and plays on one of the best power plays in the NHL, especially if you look at just the skill on paper. William Nylander, Austin Matthews, John Tavares, and Mitch Marner. So that helps Rielly stay in this top 10 for the second half of the season. All right, coming in at number 9 for the second half of the season for defenseman, Noah Dobson on the New York Islanders. So having a career year so far this year, 52 points on the year. That's 3rd most amongst defensemen, 3rd most fantasy hockey points scored amongst defensemen as well. But I think we'll see him take a little bit of a step back here in the second half of the season, but not far enough where I think he's going to be outside of the top 10, because he is an assist merchant. Any player that's in the top 11 in terms of points scored this year amongst D-men, he has the fewest goals, but 46 assists, I believe, is second to only Quinn Hughes, which is great. But obviously you want to see a little bit better production on the goal side of it, and there's not a ton to believe that he's going to score more goals in the second half, because he's 33rd in expected goals for amongst defensemen this season, 40th in high danger scoring chances, and on this Islanders team too, the new regime with Patrick Roy I think will help. But the one thing with Patrick Roy that he came in and is looking to change is really how this team has played this year, because they've been terrible defensively. Patrick Roy brought over his assistant coach from Quebec, who is very defensive-minded, helping the defensemen, and maybe they put a little bit more of an emphasis on the defenseman to actually play defense, which maybe hinders Noah Dobson a little bit. I'm saying that could be a chance, but it's a reason why I'm not having as much certainty with Noah Dobson in the second half of the season than I did in the first half. I still think he'll end up being top 10. His shot volume is still very solid, and he blocks a ton of shots, to be honest, for the caliber of player he is. So Noah Dobson is going to drop off a little bit, but not far enough where he's outside the top 10. All right, coming in at number 8 on the list is Josh Morrissey on the Winnipeg Winnipeg Jets so far this season. 34 points scored on the year. Having a pretty solid year, but I think we can see him jump into the top 10 spot as we see him right now in terms of fantasy hockey points scored. Looking at the defenseman position, he's just outside that top 10 number. Fourth in expected goals for amongst the defensemen, something we've seen that's been relatively common with Josh Morrissey. He acts as maybe more of a forward than he does as a defenseman. Even on a Rick Bowness-led Winnipeg Jets team, Rick Bowness always been a little bit more defensive-minded, which I think helps Josh Morrissey because he can still add that offensive factor to his game, which is obviously the best part of it. But if you're looking on the power play this year as well, I don't think we've seen him tap into his full potential. Only 8 power play points, but he is the second best expected goals for on the power play. So look out for how he produces on the man advantage in the second half of the season here. He's also 6th in shots on goal and 5th in scoring chances amongst defensemen. On a competitive Jets team for the rest of the season, I think we can definitely see Morrissey finishing with his second straight 70-plus points. All right, number 7 on the list, Adam Fox on the New York Rangers. Maybe a little bit of surprise. Maybe people thought he'd be a little bit higher, considering his point production and how not few games, but definitely missed obviously a decent amount of games with an injury at some point this year. But despite missing time with injury, he does had a great season. 37 points in 40 games. Has a power play point in every second game this year. 20 power play points in 40 games played. Obviously very solid. Probably the highest rate amongst defensemen, apart from maybe Cale Makar at this point. He's going to continue to produce 100% playing on a Rangers team that's very competitive. One of the best teams in the NHL, if not the best team in the Eastern Conference. They're going to be scoring a lot, but his shooting percentage is very high. 12%. It's the highest of his career. We've seen him right around the 7% average. His shot volume also kind of down as well. Not even averaging 2 shots per game this season with 68 shots on 40 game span so far this year. His shooting percentage on the power play as well is also really high, 14%, which is why I think we're seeing him produce at such a high rate. Can he keep that up? Will be kind of hard to tell, but maybe we see this Rangers power play that's ranked 3rd so far this year take a little bit of regression as well as we get into the second half of the season. Could very well happen, which could hurt into Adam Fox's production, which is why I have him 7th on this list and maybe not side the top 5. And so number 6 on the list, just outside the top 5, that's Evan Bouchard on the Edmonton Oilers. Certainly a breakout season for Bouchard at this point, 43 points on the season. This was one of the big preseason discussions in terms of breakout defenseman, Evan Bouchard. After last season, we saw him kind of squeak back onto that first power play after Tyson Barrie kind of got traded and moved off of it. We saw him be a little bit more of a producer on the power play in the playoffs as well, which has now bled into this season, and he's having a great year. Currently 5th amongst defensemen in Yahoo Fantasy points scored, double-digit goals, playing on a top power play line that is one of the best power plays in the NHL for the last 2 seasons. Last year, especially this year too, their 4th best power play percentage this season at 26%. 20 power play points, ranks top 5 amongst defensemen this season as well. Last season, Edmonton's power play throughout the regular season hit at a 32% rate, so maybe we see them even get better and match that number from last year in the second half, which will certainly help Bouchard's production. But I think just as a whole, he's on the ice more often than not with Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl, which is always going to help you when in terms of scoring points, and especially when you're playing on the man advantage as well. He's also 5th in expected goals for amongst defensemen this season. So I think what we've seen from Evan Bouchard this year is what we can expect from him for years to come, and it's certainly the second half of the season. All right, coming in at number 5, a guy who's actually ranked outside the top 100 for the first half points scored, and that's Brandon Montour in the Florida Panthers. So has played just 34 games this season because he missed about the first month and a half due to an injury. Him and Ekblad both came back at the same time, but he hasn't really found his footing even since coming back and even after his explosion of a year last season. But since January 1st, he leads all defensemen in expected goals for, so creating a lot of offense for this Florida Panthers team. We've seen the Florida Panthers play extremely well, and I think they will continue to. His current shooting percentage is less than 3%. It's at 2.4%. His career average shooting percentage is like 6 to 7. And even last year, 73 points scored on the season, 16 goals, 57 assists, and 33 power play points. We saw his shooting percentage, as I mentioned, right around 7%. This is way below his career average, something we haven't really seen from Brandon Montour. A guy who's actually in a very similar spot to Montour, and it maybe goes a little bit further because he is a forward, was Matt Tkachuk, who had a really tough time scoring at the beginning of the year. His shooting percentage was extremely low. We saw in the month of January, I believe he was tied 2nd for most points amongst forwards, or just in the NHL with 24. So maybe we could see something similar happen to Brandon Montour. He'll certainly continue to contribute, maybe more in the assist department, but we haven't really seen what we saw last season in the goal department from Brandon Montour at all. So will continue to say Florida is an unbelievable team and will continue to score and be competitive. So look for Montour to explode, I would say, on 5-on-5 and power play for the second half of the season and finish, or just be a top 5 fantasy hockey defenseman for the second half after All-Star break. All right, coming in at number 4 on the list is Rasmus Dahlin on the Buffalo Sabres, currently tied with Cale Makar for most goals amongst defensemen this season with 13. Having another big year after his 73-point season just a season ago. And I think we're starting to see Buffalo also play a lot better offensively, be a lot more competitive, start to win a lot more games. We certainly saw that in the month of January, which hopefully will help Dahlin's production. And not only that, but his plus minus as well, which has been terrible this year. I think he was a plus 12 last season when Buffalo was close to making the playoffs. This year, I think he's a minus 12. So obviously looking to see some production on that end and really just improvement in the second half. But looking at his numbers amongst defensemen this season in terms of analytically, third best expected goals for the season, sixth best since January 1st, continues to score at a very high rate and play very well. Dahlin going for 80 points is definitely not out of the question this season. There's a reason why he's in the top four, and I think there's still some potential there to be untapped as well. He's currently tied sixth in points with Morgan Rielly, but Makar and Hughes, I will think, will lead, obviously, the NHL amongst defensemen in points. I think there's something to be said about Dahlin leading all defensemen in goals this season. All right, coming at number 3, Roman Josi on the Nashville Predators. He's been an absolute stud in fantasy hockey for the past 5 seasons, really continued to battle for the Norris Trophy as well. Second in expected goals for amongst defensemen this season, leads all D-men in shots on goal with 165. It's 45 points on the year so far through 51 games, but still fourth in fantasy points amongst fantasy hockey defensemen with just a 6% shooting percentage. It's relatively around his career average as well, so I wouldn't expect another 20 goals in the second half of the season, but another 10 like he scored in the first half, I could certainly see at this rate right now. Last year finished third in fantasy points scored amongst defensemen, which is good to see, so he's right back in that window like we saw last season. I think we could see another 45 points in the second half of the season from Roman Josi here. Nashville continues to be competitive in this Western Conference and, compete for a playoff spot where a lot of people didn't think they can get there. I think the addition of Andrew Brunette has certainly helped this team offensively, and then also bringing in Barry Trotz as the GM has also helped them save and preserve that defensive mindedness of the Nashville Predators as well. They also have a great goalie, so that certainly helps too. But on the power play this season, 18 power play points so far this year, has the second highest expected goals for, so maybe we could see a little bit of improvement in power play points in the second half of the season for Josi and even the Nashville Predators as a whole. But it's hard to keep this guy out of the top 3, contributes in every facet of the game for the Nashville Predators, especially offensively, and plays so much. All right, number 2 on the list, Quinn Hughes on the Vancouver Canucks. Obviously not a huge shock, and number 1, I'm sure you guys can guess who that will be. But, I mentioned Dobson to be the assist merchant, but Quinn Hughes is really the true assist merchant at this point. Leads all defensemen in points with 64 so far this season. 52 assists this year is just an astronomical number through 50 games played, obviously over an assist per game at this point. He's top 10 in expected goals for, third in scoring chances, so creating a ton of offense from the back end for this Canucks team, who has just played so well this season as well. He's 9th in shots with 120 so far this year. Has just 1 goal on the power play in the man advantage this season, which is a little surprising, but looking at his shooting percentage and his shot volume, I think we might be able to see a little bit of an uptick there, which will obviously help him and why he continues to be in number 2. But it's going to be between him and Makar for probably top points amongst defensemen this season. But I think keeping Makar at number 1, you can just rely on his goal scoring ability a little bit more, considering he's done it a little bit more consistently than Quinn Hughes so far in his career. And coming in at number 1, Cale Makar, obviously not a huge surprise. Cale Makar leads all defensemen in goals this season, tied with Dahlin with 13. He leads defensemen in expected goals for on the power play points with 27, and was tied for the lead in points in the month of January amongst defensemen as well. He's third in shots too, which is also very important, only behind Josi and one other guy. I mean, it's Cale Makar. It's hard to argue why he shouldn't be the number 1 ranked fantasy hockey defenseman. Former Norris, Calder, Conn Smythe winner, on pace for a 100+ point season at this point, and will certainly, if he doesn't get 100 points, outpace his career high of 86 if he does stay healthy this season. So he's also almost matched his power play point total from last season, where he had 30, already 27. So he just continues to improve. Cale Makar, the number 1 fantasy hockey defenseman to have on your team for the second half of the season. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of the fantasy hockey defenseman for the second half of the season, top 11. That is, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Be sure to comment if there's any you disagreed with, any you agreed with as well. And I'll see you guys in the next video.